Greetings, Phoenix fans. I'm David Sanders, and welcome to another installment of Phoenix Frights 2020. Today we'll be taking a look at Rocksteady Studios and Warner Bros. Interactive Entertainment's 2015 title, Batman Arkham Knight. If you're wondering why I chose to review Arkham Knight as part of this year's Phoenix Frights event, there are two main reasons for that. One, the game's events canonically take place on Halloween. And two, the game's main antagonist is none other than the maniacal, fear-obsessed psychiatrist-turned-psychopath Dr. Jonathan Crane, better known as Scarecrow. Combined, I think these two factors make Arkham Knight an excellent candidate for a spot in this year's Phoenix Frights festivities, so here we are. Before we get down to business, though, I must include a word of warning. This video will contain major story spoilers for not just Arkham Knight, but two of its predecessors, Arkham City, and to a much lesser extent, Arkham Asylum as well. If you don't want the events of any of these games spoiled for you, I understand if you elect to stop watching now. Having said that, everyone who's still with me, let's get started by discussing the events that set the game's stage.
This is how it happened. This is how the Batman died.
Arkham Knight begins with a narration by Gotham City Police Commissioner Jim Gordon. Gordon explains that 9 months ago, the Joker died, which takes place at the end of Arkham City. Commissioner Gordon knows this rather intimately, as he's quick to tell us that he personally oversaw Joker's cremation, or as he puts it, pressed the button and burnt the evil bastard himself. Gotham City and its residents then braced for the inevitable power struggle that would surely rush in to fill the vacuum left by Joker's absence. But according to Gordon, such a power struggle never came to pass. In fact, Gordon states that crime in Gotham actually fell. That is, of course, until a couple nights before Halloween, when Scarecrow decided to strike by releasing a small amount of his trademark fear toxin inside a small diner. I know that doesn't sound like much, especially for a major member of Batman's rogues gallery, but the chaos at the hands of the mad Dr. Jonathan Crane had only just begun. Scarecrow manages to convince Gotham's officials to evacuate the entire city by threatening to detonate a massive fear toxin bomb which would cover the whole of Gotham and turn it into, as he calls it, his personal city of fear. It then falls, as it always does, to Batman to stop the Mad Doctor from detonating his chemical device and dooming Gotham to eternal panic. Batman manages to track down Scarecrow to the central mixing chamber of the Ace Chemicals building. Batman briefly apprehends Scarecrow, but is ultimately forced to release him because Scarecrow claims to have Commissioner Gordon's daughter Barbara Gordon, aka Oracle, aka Batman's IT department, in his clutches. Shortly before this apprehension takes place, however, we learn the real reason for Scarecrow's otherwise particularly peculiar decision to give local officials time to evacuate Gotham. It turns out that the chemical weapon Crane has been working on is so massive that it won't simply envelop Gotham in fear toxin. It has the capability to form a cloud of toxic gas over the entire east coast of the United States. Scarecrow didn't care if everyone fled from Gotham because they had virtually no place on that side of the country to which they could safely escape. We'll come back to Scarecrow and his fear toxin bomb in a bit, but for now let's switch gears and discuss another aspect of Arkham Knight's plot. Of course, in order for Scarecrow to be able to work on his bomb in peace and accomplish his ultimate goal of ending the legend of the Batman, he's going to need some obstacles at his disposal to slow the Dark Knight down. These obstacles arrive in the form of a private, well-trained militia force commanded by the titular Arkham Knight. No one, perhaps not even Scarecrow, knows the Knight's identity, but it's clear nonetheless that the Knight has quite a lot of personal history with Batman. The Knight makes it painfully obvious that he wants nothing more than to see Batman dead by his hand by the end of Halloween night as a result of that history. In one instance later in the story during which the Arkham Knight talks to Batman, the Knight states that there's a significant difference between himself and Scarecrow in that, quote, "Scarecrow wants you to suffer, Batman. I just want you dead." As it happens, the Knight's militia also deploys remote-controlled tanks in addition to the standard militiamen. These tanks, as you might imagine, are too powerful for Batman to destroy on foot. This forces the Caped Crusader to pull out the biggest trick in his utility belt, the keys to the Batmobile.
What are you doing? Evening the odds.
From that point on, the Batmobile serves as the game's preferred way for you to traverse Gotham City, although the standard grappling hook into gliding around at the speed of sound method, to which you may already be accustomed, still works just fine. I think I can hear a collective sigh of relief from all the Batman fans watching this review who haven't yet played Arkham Knight. Honestly, the fact that the method of travel with which fans of the Arkham franchise are already familiar is still a viable option has always made me feel like the entire Batmobile versus remote-controlled tanks idea was kinda shoehorned in. Yes, the Batmobile is really cool and all, any nerd worth their salt will readily tell you that. Even so, I feel as though the Batmobile is trying too hard to overshadow the fact that players can just as easily glide around Gotham instead of driving. In fact, let's skip ahead a bit in the story, shall we? The footage you're seeing on screen now is from a part much later on in the game wherein Scarecrow does actually manage to envelop Gotham in fear toxin, albeit on a much smaller scale than he had originally hoped. The process of him doing so shorts out the Batmobile's power cells somehow, which renders the car inoperable until Batman finds a way to repair it and subsequently braves the cloud of toxin in order to do so. During this segment and all segments like it, where the Batmobile is either occupied or out of commission for some reason, I felt liberated, for lack of a better word. That largely has to do with the fact that throughout the points where the Batmobile is unavailable, there is no risk of me accidentally pressing my controller's left bumper and consequently having Batman stop whatever he was doing to dive headlong into the car when it arrives at his location. That really breaks the flow of gameplay when it happens. That's especially true because the button command on a controller for summoning the Batmobile in Arkham Knight is the same button that all 3 other Arkham games designated for the activation of Detective Mode. Needless to say, because of this, I find myself in the driver's seat of the Batmobile far more often than I'd actually like, which is something I never thought I'd say. Let's go back to Scarecrow and his big scary bomb for a short while. I mentioned earlier that Batman tracks down the Mad Doctor to the central mixing chamber of the Ace Chemicals building and actually manages to get hold of Scarecrow before everything starts going to hell for the Dark Knight. After Scarecrow escapes, we see that Batman apparently knows off the top of his head how to get the mixing chamber to deploy a neutralizing agent to counteract the chemicals that Scarecrow has loaded into the facility to create his bomb. Batman must load the neutralizing agent into each chemical chamber, and he must do so agonizingly slowly so as not to be blown to bat bits. As you might expect by now, Scarecrow's fear toxin has begun to take its toll on Batman, so he starts to hallucinate. He manages to load most of the neutralizing agent and significantly reduce the blast radius of the bomb until...
Neutralizing agent deployed. Blast radius increased by 1,000%.
Wait, what?
1,000%. 1,000%.
Miss me?
Yep, that's the Joker alright. He's voiced by the legendary Mark Hamill and everything, even though I could almost swear I've read about Mr. Hamill saying he would give up the role after Arkham City. Now, I know what you're thinking. Wait, but the Joker is supposed to be dead. Commissioner Gordon cremated him at the very beginning of the game. You're right, but let me explain. This is where the other major spoilers for Arkham City's story come into play, in addition to some spoilers for Arkham Asylum. I'll summarize this as quickly as I can. You see, as we've established, the Joker died at the end of Arkham City. What killed him was a blood infection brought on by the Clown Prince of Crime injecting himself with what was called the Titan formula back at the end of Arkham Asylum. This Titan stuff constituted what Joker thought was a way for him to essentially create massive, brutish henchmen that not even Batman could bring down. The formula had a similar effect on Joker when he injected himself with some of it, but as is usually the case, Batman and his particular brand of justice prevailed once again. Then, a little ways into Arkham City, Batman winds up knocked out cold and wakes up restrained in the Joker's hideout within the titular portion of Gotham. The Dark Knight is horrified to find that the Joker has transfused some of his infected blood into him, which means that Batman must rush to find a cure for the disease if he doesn't want to die a horrible death in a matter of hours. You just can't catch a break, can you, Bruce? Anyway, the reason I bring that up is to help this aspect of Arkham Knight make a bit more sense. Even though the actual Joker is dead and burned up, Batman still has enough of Joker's infected blood coursing through his veins to where the new and improved version of Scarecrow's fear toxin causes the Caped Crusader to hear and see the Joker in his hallucinations. It's almost as if Batman can't cope with the loss of his archenemy even though he actually attempted to prevent Joker's death. Sad, isn't it? Actually, speaking of sadness, that leads me to another aspect of Arkham Knight and Arkham City that I want to discuss in this review. These two Arkham games in particular contain a lot of moments and plot points which are clearly intended to tug at the player's heartstrings. Now, I usually don't get emotional over video games, mostly because I'm a cynical jerk of sorts, but I have a bit of a confession to make. The sight of Batman carrying the body of the Joker out into the snow and gingerly resting him on the hood of a police car still gets me tearing up at the very least each time I witness it. I've finished Arkham City's story at least 4 times now, and that remains the case. Arkham Knight, in the same vein, has several moments that are designed to cause similar emotions within its player base. Fair warning, though, this is where the story spoilers for Arkham Knight will get particularly heavy. There are 3 such moments that really stand out to me off the top of my head. For the first of them, I feel I should include a content warning, though I won't describe anything in detail. Brace yourselves, because here we go. There's a part in approximately the early mid-game wherein Batman sees Oracle trapped by Scarecrow in a fear toxin dispersal chamber within arm's reach of a gun. I think that's all I feel comfortable saying about that particular section of Arkham Knight. If you feel at all uncomfortable by what I've just mentioned, I want to emphasize that I am right there with you. Secondly, I should establish that throughout most of Arkham Knight's story, Batman works alongside Poison Ivy. Poison Ivy comes into play because she's naturally immune to Scarecrow's fear toxin, and because she can raise plants that can remove the toxin from the air, thus purifying it and allowing anyone remaining in Gotham to safely breathe again. There are a few points in the story wherein Batman has to use the Batmobile's built-in sonar scanner to search for and raise the roots of plants powerful enough to purify Gotham. Once these plants are raised, Ivy can harden their bark and make it impossible for the Arkham Knight's militia to destroy them before they clear the toxin from the air. Unfortunately, this entire process takes quite a physical toll on Poison Ivy. Much later on in the story, Batman heads to where Ivy is stationed with the intent of checking on her, only to solemnly discover that she's not long for this world. This part usually brings a tear to my eye, although it doesn't make me quite as emotional as the aspect of the story that I'm about to bring up: the reveal of the Arkham Knight's identity. After several skirmishes and head-on battles, Batman finally unmasks the Knight to find that he is none other than Jason Todd. You know, Jason Todd, the second iteration of Robin after the arguably more famous Dick Grayson. Well, if you don't know who Jason Todd is, I suspect that there's a good reason for that. Let me explain, because this story is wild. If you're like me, you're far too young to remember this when it was actually happening, but see if you can make sense of this. In 1988, during the 4-issue A Death in the Family storyline, DC Comics actually held an opinion poll where readers could call a telephone number and vote on whether or not they wanted to see Jason Todd killed by the Joker. Those who participated in the poll decided, albeit narrowly, that they wanted Jason to die, and so DC obliged. How messed up is that? So that would probably be why you may not remember Jason Todd as Robin. However, you may know him from the role he took up upon being revived in later story arcs, namely Red Hood. Despite being trained by Batman, which means he had the whole never kill anyone under any circumstances thing forcibly drilled into his skull throughout his entire tenure as Robin, Red Hood serves as more of an anti-hero with an obvious willingness to use firearms and lethal force. Anyway, back to Arkham Knight. There are resolutions for 2 of these 3 moments that stand out to me as being particularly emotional. To my great relief, it turns out in the end that Oracle is perfectly fine and didn't harm herself. Batman was merely hallucinating when he saw her in that fear gas chamber with that gun. Secondly, a while after Batman defeats and unmasks the Knight, the two eventually manage to reconcile. Unfortunately, there wasn't much that could be done for poor Poison Ivy, but as Alfred said after her death, her final act was a noble one. I don't want to spoil the actual end to Arkham Knight's story, so instead I'll wrap up this review by mentioning the last thing I wanted to discuss. If I had elected to review Arkham Knight at any point earlier this year, I would likely have started that review by spending about 10 minutes complaining about the poor quality of the game's PC port. Arkham Knight is, as you probably know, infamous for having a PC port that was so utterly unplayable on many machines that the game was actually temporarily pulled from Steam so that more work could be done to improve it. Even so, the game still ran particularly terribly on my machine after I bought it once it returned to the Steam platform. Until recently. I have no idea what may have been done, when it was done, or who was responsible for it, but at the time I'm recording this review, Arkham Knight actually runs nearly flawlessly on my aging middle-of-the-road gaming rig. I've had exactly 1 frame rate hiccup during the time I spent recording footage of the game for this review, and even then I was still getting 55 FPS rather than 60. If only I knew who was responsible for repairing this port after all this time, I would gladly salute them for making a game in one of my favorite franchises actually worth playing again. Alright my friends, I think I've said everything I wish to say about Batman Arkham Knight. So for now, you've been watching Phoenix Gaming. My name is once again David Sanders. I want to thank you immensely for your viewership, and I want you to remember that this channel would be nothing without the support of our friends and fans just like you. In case I don't get another chance to say this, from all of us here at Phoenix Gaming, have a safe and happy Halloween. I'll see you next time.